Hello everyone, my name is Ewa Cybulska-Bohuszewicz, and today I would like to present you a record of yesterday's meeting. It was an online symposium, the Jagiellonian Heritage, the Perspective of International Research. To be honest, it was one of the highlights of the entire project. As you know, yesterday there was gigantic collapsing of the Google server, and yes, it happened to us too. But the angels are watching. Our special guest, Professor Mirosława Hanusiewicz-Lawalli, saved the situation by connecting us to her own Zoom. This is the second situation, however, in the project that Zoom saves us. Mirosława, thank you very much. You saved the second part of our meeting. So, despite the technical difficulties, we managed. I'm glad and proud that our project is developing. I'm also glad that the atmosphere in the project is the same as you will see in our films. These are meetings of people interested in this subject, Jagiellonian heritage, who, although far away, talk to each other just like old good friends. Thank you for your participation, and I'm glad that I can do something with you, not only for the development of knowledge about the heritage of the Jagiellonians, but above all, I can live my childhood passion for getting to know northern countries that have ice and fire in perfect proportions. Hugs to all of you, to Susanna, Anu, Nina, Joanna, Pieter, Renata, Raimonda, Michał, Dariusz, Patrycja. But I'm also thinking of those who were not with us yesterday, but who cooperate with us and are in touch. Natalia Nowakowska from the Oxford University and Mia Ijas-Idrobo from Tampere and Paweł Bohuszewicz. I really know, I can feel it. I'm sure that together we will do something really important. And at the same time, we will show that science is something more than only research, that it is a great and fascinating adventure that connects people even from distant countries. So thank you to all of you and enjoy our materials, which are the effects of your work. Bye.
Good morning, everyone. Cybulska-Bohuszewicz honored me with her request to chair the first session of our conference, which I felt privileged to accept. And now I'm delighted to offer all our distinguished participants a warm welcome. The program is very busy and time is precious, so we should better get started. It is my duty to request that all the participants please keep their contributions concise in order to finish the meeting on time. That 25 minutes, which everyone has at her or his disposal, is reserved both for presentation and a follow-on discussion. And our first speaker is Nina Manninen from the University of Turku. Nina is a PhD student in archaeology and Finnish history, conducting research on Katarina Jagiellonica and her inventory. Her presentation today will introduce us to the main problems of this research. Ina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'll just share my presentation here. Can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Now.
Okay.
Yes.
So there. So hello everybody. My name is Nina Manninen. It's nice to meet you all and thank you for having me. Unfortunately, my time here in this seminar is quite limited due to prior engagements. I have a doctoral seminar to attend to after this, but I like to take this opportunity to introduce myself and tell you a little about what I do. I'm an archaeologist and I study Catherine Jagiellon's possessions in contemporary documents in the University of Turku. So you can see me here pondering on Catherine's life by her effigy in Uppsala Cathedral, Sweden. I've been interested in Catherine's possessions for about a decade now. And in 2012, I started to think about recreating clothing artifacts from the inventories that list her property. Recreating historically accurate clothing was very familiar to me since I have a background in historical reenacting, which I've done for over 20 years now. But I was more interested in the Middle Ages and I had never tried my hand on Renaissance clothing. And moreover, my interest lied in common people, not royalty. But the result came out quite nice, and so my interest in the subject soon grew sort of out of proportion, so much so that in 2016 I started writing my master's thesis on Catherine's clothing. It took a lot of work learning Polish in order to read original documents and research literature. Visiting researchers in Krakow and Uppsala, gathering all the information from the documents, etc. But last year I finally got it out and you can find it online. For example, Googling its name that's written there, kultaa, silkkiä ja Itämaiden kalleuksia. It's only in Finnish, unfortunately, but I guess you can get a basic overview using Translate or some other tool. I suppose I don't have to go into detail with who our main character is, but just say what's most relevant here is that she married Duke John of Finland in 1562 and moved from Poland to Turku, Finland. The documents I'm referring to are my main sources, the inventory of dowry from 1562 and the inventory of possessions from 1563, both of which have survived to present day. The inventory of dowry can be found digitized online, but the inventory of possessions is kept in the state's archives in Stockholm's castle. So you have to book a time and go see them there. While the inventory of dowry lists everything Catherine brought with her to Turku Castle, the inventory of possessions lists what was left of it after the sieging and plundering of the castle when the ducal pair got arrested and transferred to custody in Sweden. The focus in my research is on Catherine's time at Turku Castle as the Duchess of Finland, the years 62 and 63. I aim to trace biographies of the artifacts Catherine owned, but also to create a new overview of the court life in Turku Castle with all its material, but also cultural aspects. However, as an archaeologist, I am first and foremost interested in the artifacts in the documents, but one purpose of my research is also to fill a gap. The research so far has been based on incomplete sources. In Finland, it's been thought that a shortened version from 1868 was the actual inventory of dowry, and what's more, researchers have been using a Finnish translation of it. I too thought that the shortened version was all there was, and learned about the original document only on my trip to Krakow, where I was basically told my work was so far had been based on incomplete sources, and I had to rewrite a very large portion of it after learning myself a little Polish in order to read the document and gathering the brand new information from it. Of course. So, what's more, researchers in Sweden haven't been aware of the Polish inventory and vice versa. So, to my knowledge, my master's thesis was the first to utilize both documents in their entirety and in the original languages. And that work forms the base of my dissertation as well. I've been able to make completely new findings of artifacts by analyzing the entries and comparing them with each other. And the documents also reveal changes in material culture in changing environments. In my master's thesis, I discussed only two groups of clothing items, gowns and loose gowns, but in my dissertation, I will cover all aspects of material culture in the document. The source material is very large. You can see that in the picture. I've classified all the artifacts into 8 main groups with nearly 50 subgroups and their own subgroups that consist of almost 400. To be fair, though, some of these subgroups consist of only 1 or 2 items, but others have a larger number of artifacts as well. Partly these are formed after grouping in the inventories, but mainly the grouping is my own and based on the use of the artifacts. The groups are from the largest to the smallest: clothing, jewelry, silver, pewter, and copper, fabrics and embellishments, which could also be grouped under clothing or jewelry, kitchenware, furnishing, ecclesiastical artifacts, and miscellaneous textiles. Not that much can be said about my actual work so far, since it's only my first year as a PhD candidate, and I work on my research only part-time since I don't receive any funding. I am only in the earliest phases in my studies. I've been studying some obligatory courses during this last year while working, but I've also held courses and lectures, written popular science articles, and given a few interviews on my subject. In fact, there's one coming out around the new year. But because of being busy elsewhere, I feel I don't have enough time to dedicate to the actual research. But I'm trying to get even a little done every day. In addition to gathering and categorizing my data, I've started working on the different groups and individual artifacts. Since my master's thesis dealt with Catherine's clothing, that's the group I have most information on and a group that's nearly done. But I'm moving on to other groups as well. But here are some results regarding Catherine's clothing. This is a reconstruction of an outfit that I've made based on the inventories. Making the loose gown, which can be seen here, was a part of my master's thesis, but everything else seen pictured here I've made earlier. It's kind of experimental archaeology as well, since everything is handmade and the stitches and techniques used are the same than in the 16th century. The garments are chosen based on what was most common and appeared most frequently in the document. So this is probably the most common look for Catherine in Turku Castle. Well, yes, very shortly about me and my work. Thank you again, and thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention. And I would also like to give special thanks to our project leader, Eva, who has offered her expertise in Old Polish to my use as my second supervisor, and also to Susanna, who introduced me to this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting. We all wish you all the best with your project. And now we have time for some questions to our speaker. If no one, I may start with some probably very naive and obvious question, but I'm an ignorant in the matter. So you mentioned that the inventory of the dowry and the inventory of the possessions are different because many items were looted.
Yes.
Did any of those looted items ever emerged in any of the collections in Finland, Sweden?
Not to my knowledge, or not to anybody's knowledge. There's only one item in the inventories that survived to present day, and that's the necklace that can be seen in the portrait.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, thank you.
And maybe
Professor Hemperek.
Could you please tell us how rich is the collection of jewelry? What
collection
about jewelry?
So what about that?
Yeah, how big is this collection? How many items do you have?
17 necklace. I remember
yeah.
From the Polish.
Okay,
inventory.
good, you remember. I of course have these. I don't remember everything by heart, but yes, there are. If I can just get my documents open here.
Nina, but according to Swedish or Polish inventory you are looking for?
I'm looking for them both.
Mm-hmm.
So I have grouped the jewelry like for example, the necklaces, pendants, etc. differently. So, well, the question about the jewelry in the inventory of possessions is a bit tricky one because they have listed both Catherine and John's jewelry all together. So some of those might belong to John, but when we compare the inventory of possessions with the inventory of dowry, we can see that majority of the jewelry listed in the possessions belongs to Catherine. So we can find them also there.
Mm-hmm. And one question more. Do you have any information about the history of this jewelry? I mean, there are some hopes that some of the jewelry after Katarina Jagiellonica was given to Anna Vasa. Did you have any research about it?
I will look
the history of this jewelry.
Not yet, but I will look into that because one of my main questions is to trace the biographies, so where they came from and where they are now, if they are anywhere.
There is at least one. What is that? Not a necklace.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. There is a jewelry at the Livrustkammaren in Stockholm, which belonged to Anna Vasa.
Yes, I know it.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful one and well preserved.
Yes.
But it's a great project, Nina, and thank you very much for this. I have also studied the Swedish inventory, and there are so many things, and I think that since 1000, from the beginning of the 20th century, nobody has really studied it.
Dr. Cybulska-Bohuszewicz, please.
I've got also a question to you, Nina. What about Polish words which are in Swedish inventory? Do you remember some of them? Or not?
There are no Polish words in the Swedish inventory, not at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because it was written by the Swedish scribes, and they didn't know any Polish. So.
Okay, I don't know Swedish inventory at all, only the Polish version. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Nina? No? Thanks again. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Susanna Niiranen from the University of, now it's challenging, Jyväskylä in Finland. Professor Niiranen's presentation is focused on Jagiellonian remnants in Scandinavia and elsewhere, viewed from the perspective of the book history and cultural history. Professor Niiranen, who is a key partner in this project, was previously involved in the well-known Oxford project, the Jagiellonians Dynasty Memory Identity, where she studied Katarina Jagiellonica memory in Sweden and Finland. Please, Professor Niiranen.
Thank you very much. So I haven't used this Google Meet sharing. So is it that window view or which one? I have 3 views here. Let's try that one. No.
Sulla pitää olla se, jos sulla on PowerPoint, niin okei, se täytyy olla aktiivisena ja sitten sä voit vasta jakaa sen sieltä.
Just. Niin se on toi. Now can you see the PowerPoint?
Oh, yes.
Very good. Here we go. So first of all, I would like to thank Eva for gathering us around this ever-intriguing subject. Well, it's still dark, but it's coming now. Here we go. And since Eva instructed us not to prepare a proper scientific paper, my intention is just to present myself and what I have done on the subject and what I am currently doing with it. And I would like to correct the original title. I'm not studying Jagiellonian remnants as such, meaning bones or archaeological finds, but rather cultural remnants in Scandinavia, mainly in Sweden. Currently, I'm working for a sub-project of the Academy of Finland, which funds the project called Late Medieval and Early Modern Libraries as Knowledge Repositories, Guardians of Tradition, and Catalysts of Change. Its abbreviation is LAMEMOLI. And my objectives are to identify the volumes of the Jagiellon provenance and to explore their use in the north and discuss the roles of these books and the roles of war booty in general in shaping early modern identities. Before that, I was a member of the Jagiellonians project, which was an ERC-funded project based at the University of Oxford. And within that project, the concept of dynasty was the thing we were looking at. Meaning, how did they perceive themselves and how were they perceived by others? Was there a certain Jagiellonian identity? And also, what was their memory in different areas? Because it was a huge area in Europe. And had that memory a certain role in various national state buildings and nationalisms. Our research team consisted of Natalia Nowakowska, who was the head of the project and who was responsible for Poland, Polish area. Ilya Afanasiev studied Bohemian Kingdom, Stanislava Kuzmova, Hungary, and Giedremich Kunaite, Lithuania. Dusan Zupka explored German areas, and Sweden was my responsibility. And of course, the Duchy of Finland, which was the part of the realm. And so far, we have published this anthology, Remembering the Jagiellonians, edited by Natalia Nowakowska. And the publisher says that it's the first study of international memories of the Jagiellonians, very proudly. But if you are interested in that memory part, we begin with the early modern period, how they were remembered after very soon after the collapse, if I may say, or after the first after the last generations of the royal family. So we explored how these memories were established and constructed and maintained in these different parts they used to rule. So my task was to study Catherine as a member of this dynasty in Scandinavia. In Great Britain, they call Scandinavia meaning all the north, but as we know, Finland officially is not part of Scandinavia. But Scandinavia means here mostly Sweden. Here are some of my publications so far on the subject. Katarina Jagiellonica ja tehtävä Ruotsissa concerns the recatholization in the north, and then there is that counseling between the Catholic Jagiellons and the Lutheran Vasas in the Queenship and Council in early modern Europe publication. And then there is that remembering of past Princess Catherine Jagiellon and the construction of national narratives in Sweden and Finland, of which I will explain a little bit more in this presentation. The numbers 2 and 5 are more related to my current project on book history, libraries, many roles in the Middle Ages and at the beginning of the early modern era, an overview to the book historical methods and current approaches. And then the last article is about Johannes Messenius' Scondia Illustrata and its process from a manuscript to the print. Well, about the memory, one of the lieux de mémoire, if we borrow the concept made famous by French historian Pierre Nora, is Uppsala Cathedral, of course, which Nina mentioned already, where Catherine is buried. There is that splendid Jagiellonska Koret or Jagiellonian chapel dedicated to Catherine and her tomb. And as Nina mentioned, there is also that treasury, the museum, which contains her regalia and the funeral regalia and the necklace and so forth. It's really a place to visit if you happen to be in Uppsala. And her memory is also kept there after the constructing the chapel. This painting of Krakow is painted in 19th century, if I remember correctly, and also the windows are from the 19th century. And there you can see the famous motto Nemo Nisi Mors, which is very often related to Catherine, but as far I haven't found any contemporary source to that. I have found some stories from the 19th century as well. So it is really romantic, and many people want to keep and associate that with Catherine's very exciting and dramatic life. And of course, in Stockholm there are some material memories, but they are really scarce because of the many fires and so forth. In the old royal palace, Tre Kronor Castle, there was a plate, a clay plate. This is a copy of it, which contains her monogram. A Swedish art historian, Peter Gillgren, argued that this is Katarina Jagiellonica, but as far as I can see, it is the letter K and then the letter R, meaning Katarina Regina. And then, of course, there are books related to Jagiellonians from the very early period. This Genealogia Jagiellonum is written by Johannes Messenius, the historian I already mentioned, and he was very very keen on the family and tried to put himself into their favor, and perhaps you know his fate. He ended up in Kajanebori castle as a prisoner because of his Catholic sympathies, and there he wrote the Scondia Illustrata. But this was before that. He tried to construct a genealogia for the Jagiellonian family. And as you can see on the right, there is also a genealogy made for Bonasforza, Genealogia Illustrissime Bone Reginae Poloniae, so the mother of Catherine Jagiellon. And these genealogies contain, how would I say, realistic material, but also invented fantastic material, such as Saint Bridget, Santa Birgitta as their foremother, and so forth. So I tried to compare a little bit Swedish and Finnish memory, and my main finding was that in Sweden, Catherine Jagiellon's memory hasn't been so strong than in Finland, which is perhaps not a surprise because Sweden they have so many other royal, interesting royal female figures, and of course the Queen Christina has dominated quite a lot the popular picture of these early modern queens. But there are some mentions in Swedish school history books, for instance, that image on the left is from a school history book where Catherine and John are looking at the hanged people when they arrive. They are prisoners there, and they are arriving to Sweden. And of course there is Eva Mattsson. Eva has already introduced her work in this project. She has written plays, and she has played Catherine herself, and then she has written a book called Förstinnan, which has been published by her own company, and so forth. But I visited quite many Swedish museums, but I didn't find very much related to Catherine. By contrast, in Finland, Catherine's memory has been more vivid, and the lieu de mémoire in Finland is, of course, the Turku Castle, where Karl Carberry studied its architecture and also archaeology. And he has written a book named Three Catherines in Turku Castle, and Catherine Jagiellon was one of those three Catherines. And that book was really popular and still is. But after that, not much has been done. It was published in early 80s in Swedish and then translated to Finnish, and then several editions have been made. But it's not really a scientific study. It's perhaps targeted at popular use, more or less. But it's really based on his studies. And the Turku Castle as a whole has maintained the memory of Catherine, because its renovation work is based on that Renaissance period. If you visit it, you can very quickly see that this is the period they want to concentrate on and what they want to show to the visitors. In Turku, there is Jagiellonikan katu, Jagiellonika street. There is a whole area called Katarina, but Katarinan Laakso, the Valley of Catherine, but we really don't know whether it has had the name according to this Catherine, or perhaps according to some other Catherines. And then there is that famous story of the first fork in Finland. This is not the fork, it's just a Renaissance fork from the internet. But however, according to that inventory Nina talked about, it is the first, or the first forks which are known in Finland, or which are documented in related with Finland at the time. And the fork is quite important symbolically, because we can think that the fork means the whole Renaissance civilization, the new way of manners and eating and gathering to the courts, and a new kind of social life as a whole. Then there are many children books. Our national poet Eino Leino has been inspired by Duke John and Catherine. Sorry about that. Then there are those famous Turku Castle playing cards, but as you can see, the image is not Catherine, but perhaps a Habsburg woman. And this page is copied from my daughter's text history book. And in Finnish text history books, you come across with Catherine quite often. She's one of the rare women who are not only mentioned by name, but her life is explained and elaborated a bit more than the others. So she has been, I interpret that she has been quite an important figure in Finnish history culture, not only cultural history, but history culture. And by history culture, I mean archives, museums, school teaching, exhibitions, reenactments, and so forth. But as you can see, the image here is not from the early modern period. It's from the 19th century. This drawing, and in fact, it has not much to do with Catherine herself. And then, of course, our national, the Finnish national composer, Jean Sibelius. He has composed a work called Scène historique. And Finlandia was part of that, but also there was a part called Festivo, which described the court of Catherine and John in Turku. So her memory is quite well kept and maintained also in Finnish popular culture. And now to the book historical part, I perhaps have some time to speak about that as well. So we have to start with Sigismund II Augustus's library, because it was one of the most important libraries in Renaissance Europe. He collected approximately 5,000 volumes, which is a significant number if we compared it, for instance, to Pico della Mirandola, Italian humanist who managed to collect in his short life 1,132 books. Pico is also studied in our La Memoli project, so that's why we know the exact amount of books. And his collection was also considered as considerable. And of course, there was the king, the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, who collected 3,000 books approximately. So these numbers just to give an impression about the size of the Renaissance libraries, royal libraries and important libraries. Because Sigismund II Augustus didn't have any children, his collection was given to the Vilnius Jesuit Library according to his testament. But only 14 books or 20 titles remain there nowadays at the Vilnius University Library. Alodia Kavechka-Krichova has catalogued nearly 1,000 or 958 prints and 12 manuscripts, which belong to the Royal Library of Sigismund II Augustus. Addition to that, a little more than 100 titles have been found in National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg by Maria Brunda and Maria Ivanovna Tkachenko in 2015. And altogether of these, 93 books remain today in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Well, very shortly, Sigismund Augustus's library consisted of very typical humanist humanist-orientated books. The main group was the law books, and then he had theology books, philosophical books, and medical books, natural sciences, history, geography, ancient history, philology, humanistic literature, grammar, and so forth. And of these, what is left in Scandinavian and Finnish libraries, there is one Finnish library which possesses Sigismund Augustus's book today, and it is Åbo Akademi's bibliothèque in Turku. One can see very quickly and that it is medical books which are the dominating ones. And also there are quite a lot law books as well. And the possible explanation is that since Scandinavian universities were they were teaching law and medicine quite little, so these kind of books were needed in that period. The Uppsala Faculty of Medicine was established in 1477, and it is the oldest one in Lund. It was established in the 17th century. And here are the libraries which contain Sigismund II Augustus's books today. And there is one library in Denmark, two libraries in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and one in Turku, as I mentioned, Åbo Akademi's bibliothèque, and all the others are in Sweden. And here is one example of his book collection. All the books are bound in the same way, brown, thick leather, and embossed leather, and there should be some golden ornaments, but they have been faded. But the books in the Åbo Akademi library, they are medical books, collection attributed to Galen, Omnia quae extat in Latinam sermonum conversa, printed in Venice by the Giunti printing family in 1556. These are not unique examples of these books. The same books are found also in Biblioteca Civica in Vercelli in Italy, also in the University Library of Toronto, etc. And here you can see the book a little bit closer. The front cover contains his supralibros, his coat of arms with the Polish eagle and the Lithuanian knight and the crowns. And the back cover always includes the text Sigismundi Augustu Regis Poloniae Monumentum Anno, and then the year when the binding was made. And it's quite interesting that this specific book cover contains Lutheran heroes like Erasmus of Rotterdam and Johannes Hus, Philip Melanchthon, Martin Luther, and these guys you probably know very well. From the inside, one can see that there are no markings at all, which is quite typical. These kind of very precious and expensive books were probably used as a reference library, and of course they had a status function as well. And how these books came to Finland, they are probably war booty from the deluge from Poland. We don't know how a Finnish book collector from Turku, Johan Kadolin, had them in his possession in the 18th century, but these books were really lucky because they were saved from the Great Fire in Turku in 1827. However, Jagiellonians' book collection was donated to the Åbo Academy Library when it was founded in 1919. And here is Jagiellonians' catalogue. He planned to give the books to his son, and one can see that this specific book, Galeni Omnia Que Extentant, there is marking N, meaning his son Niels. He wanted to give it to his son, but after all, it didn't happen. And some more pictures about these books in the Åbo Academy Library. And there's that watermark, which was quite typical for Central European paper. And I'm also trying to trace Sigismund or Sigismund III's library in Sweden. But because of the situation, the pandemic, I haven't been able to go to the Swedish libraries as much I wanted to. But the hypothesis is that there should be books from Vadstena Abbey, which was the last Catholic abbey in Sweden. And then there should be books both from his father's and mother's side. And it's quite interesting that the earlier scholarship says that Sigismund took his books to Poland when he left Sweden, and then Swedish troops brought them back to Sweden during the Northern War and the Swedish deluge. But there are also some evidence which proves that this is perhaps not the case. For instance, this Nikolaus Olai, who was called Regie Majestatis Bibliothecae Custos, he wrote to the Jesuit Sigmund Ernhofer that the Royal Library had no custody, or nobody took care of it. And many of the best books were robbed or stolen, and these robbers kept the books as their own books. So this indicates that his library stayed in Stockholm. And there are some books still left, and his books are not, of course, they are not necessarily the same style as his uncle's books, but there are some writings which prove that they belong to his possession, ex libri Serenissimi Sigismundi Regis Bolognae, and so forth. And then we also know that some of the books were taken from Poland as war booty. For instance, that Copernicana collection in Uppsala. 22 books are from this collection, from Sigismund's Polish collection. Perhaps I don't go to these. I think I have used my time. Just to show something on Catherine Jagiellon's books. This is the inventory Nina showed, and it says that there were 4 papistiska förgyllteböcker, and in the margin it is marked that these books were sent with a certain Jacob Tiet or Tate. He was the royal secretary at the time, to the Duchess. But unfortunately, not more than that. We know that Bona donated prayer books to all her daughters, and this Bona's book of prayers is nowadays in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. So perhaps they followed the same style. I mean, the daughters' books, and you can see also the coat of arms, the Visconti Sforza snake on the picture. And we know that John had a very good humanistic education, and his books are also listed in the inventory. It's quite funny that there is that book called Påvens Förstöring. all the others are recognizable, but this one is not. And also Nya Testament på finska, which means New Testament in Finnish, but we don't know whether he could understand Finnish language or not. But this is the only book which is left from Catherine. At least her name is mentioned on the front cover, Katharina, Regina Svikier. But it's a Lutheran book, so perhaps it was a gift and they wanted to convert Catherine. Well, I think I have used my time. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you too. It was very interesting. And though indeed our time is short, please feel free to offer your questions to Professor Nyranen. Eva, please.
Susanna, I've got only one question. I wonder if among all these books, there are some books in Polish or only Latin books?
You mean Sigismund II Augustus's books?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are mostly in Latin. There are some individual books in Greek language, but I cannot remember whether there are any books in Polish or Ruthenian or other local languages. At least they are not preserved.
Because I wonder if some of these books preserved in Turku have something in common with Polish medical books written by Falimisz, for example, and the others authors.
Yeah. That's these are writings attributed to Galen, to that Roman doctor.
So Falimisz books.
As well. Yeah, it was quite common, and there are something about that Hippocratic corpus and its commentaries. So it was a quite typical way to reuse these ancient texts. So it may be that they have a connection. I don't know this Polish material.
Okay, thank you.
Next question. Professor Peter Sjöqvist.
Yes, hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Lovely, it works. Yes, I was wondering exactly what are your plans? What are you going to do with this survey of the books from the Jagiellonians in Sweden? From what perspective are you're trying to find them, of course, in the first place?
I'm trying to find them. I'm trying to see them and to explore the materiality, whether there are any kind of use of marks of their use, for instance. But what I plan to do is to make a catalog of Sigismund the Younger's books, which are left.
Yeah.
Because they sorry.
No, please continue.
Yeah, because I haven't seen one. There are some mentions here and there, but I haven't seen any big picture of them.
I see. And have you been at the Uppsala University Library yet?
I
Or
have been,
you were planning to come here, I guess.
yeah, that was my plan, and my plan was to visit all those libraries from Copenhagen to Östersund.
Yeah.
But as we know, I haven't been able to do that. But I'm looking forward to better times. I have been in Uppsala in library many times, but I've been studying those medieval medical manuscripts, but not really those Sigismund books.
Yeah.
But fortunately, you have that Alvin portal,
Yes.
which has been helpful, and Alde has been done some work, but not systematically. He has been, he has been around the topic, but yeah.
No, but actually,
and then there is that emerging field of war booty literature, which is quite interesting, and you are going to deal with that. So so this is somehow related to what I'm also interested in. How these books were, why the Swedes were so eager to bring these books to Sweden.
Yes.
And are there any motivations behind it? I mean, because Sigismund was the king of Sweden, whether they motivate the looting by that. I haven't seen anything, but I would be delighted to hear if there is something about that.
Yes.
That dynastic motivation.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I work at the Uppsala University Library, and I have cataloged actually some of the books of Sigismund back in the days. Well, they are many, so only a few of them.
Yeah, but that helps.
Please don't hesitate to contact me at any time, because I think this is really interesting as well. So I would be very glad to be able to help in any way. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. I shall do that. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's already a wonderful result of our conference and meeting. And I'm sure we are all very excited and looking forward to the results of your research. So are there any questions? Any other questions?
One more small question. Do you know the catalog? It was edited just 4 or 5 years ago by Maria Juda from the library of Strengens. Yes.
Strängnäs,
do I pronounce it?
Yes, correctly.
Yes. Do you know this catalog? It was done by Maria Juda.
Is it that one which is on the internet?
Not maybe. Well, but it is also a book. If you don't have, I may give you information about this book.
I'm not sure. I have been in Strängnäs and I have consulted those Sigismund volumes
there.
You
know the catalog prepared by Maria Juda.
No, I think I don't. Yeah.
I will send you the
very
catalog.
Good.
I will
Thank
find
you very much. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all these remarks and questions. And now I'm pleased to welcome Professor Anu Lahtinen from the University of Helsinki, who is going to present her paper about women in Jagiełło and Vasa courts, local and interregional perspectives. Professor Lahtinen specializes in Finnish and Nordic history, medieval and early modern. Susanna, please, could you turn off your screens? I think that we will need it for Professor Lahtinen. You are still
sharing
your screen. Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. Professor Lahtinen, the floor is yours, and the screen. We cannot hear you. Please turn on your microphone. Your microphone is off. Still. Please turn on your microphone.
I'm very sorry. I had a phone call that I absolutely have to take.
Okay.
Some minutes, just some minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay, we are waiting then. I thought we had some technical problems, which happens so often during such meetings.
But I think it will work because I heard Anna's voice.
I heard too.
It's okay.
The phone call is
Mm-hmm.
done. We can proceed.
Okay. All right.
You're back.
Yes, and I'm very sorry, but it's about
understandable.
getting food to the house, and it was a pressing matter. But so my apologies, my sincere apologies, and now I'm trying to present. Susanna, jos sulla on jotain vinkkiä, että miten tämä saadaan toimimaan, I'm sorry, I'm asking help from Susanna if...
Anu, you have a kind of envelope, and here is an icon, a square with an arrow, which allows you to share your presentation.
Yes, I know, but it says something. Aha, now I see. Yes.
Aloita esitys, ja mä en kanssa löytänyt sitä heti, mutta ne ei tullut heti ne avoimet, mutta saatko nyt käyntiin? Hyvä, yes.
Now maybe...
Nyt.
You can see it.
Joo, nyt on hyvä.
Okay, so please let me know if there is something wrong. I only see some strange information, but so...
We see your screen.
Okay, great. So good afternoon. I'm very sorry for the issues, complicated times. However, I'm so glad that we managed to have this meeting online, and it's been very interesting to hear all the presentations already. My presentation will touch on the topic of women in Jagiello and Vasa courts, and there are local and interregional perspectives. I will return to that in a minute or so. And now I hope that you saw the change of slide. There should be now a slide with a title, Who is Talking?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So then it's somewhere else. Maybe now?
We still see the title page.
Okay.
Oh, now who's talking? Okay.
Okay. So it was changing. So, as might be guessed from my title, I have been focusing in my research on female agency in 16th century Swedish realm, and especially on networks of noble families. The noble Fleming family, which was very important for King Sigismundus, was part of in central position in my doctoral thesis in 2007. There is also a Swedish translation from 2009, and my focus again has been on correspondence and family records, art of writing letters, and also gifts and messages as material representations of these networks. So a little less of books and items, but they are also related to correspondences, as there were books and gifts that were sent along with letters. I have also done some studies on medieval and early modern Nordic monarchs, and recently I also co-edited a book that covers the history of nobility in Finland from the Middle Ages to the early 20th century. So And now there should be a slide showing a title nobility in Sweden in late 16th century, and just to shortly refer to where I'm coming from into this topic, the conflicts of the 1590 have been quite a lot in the focus of my studies, partly because of the, as I mentioned, the Fleming family, and there has been a lot of research done earlier. Yet I think there is much more to say about these political events if one would take the transnational, transregional, or interregional context into account. For example, when I went through the sources produced in Sweden, or sources that are available in Sweden, I often noticed that there were references to something that was going on in Poland, in Denmark, and then I made a mental note that I should return later on to the Polish archives. I have not yet found time for that, unfortunately, but maybe little by little. And anyway, something that I have observed often is that there is more to be said about women and their role in the court. We have there are ladies in waiting, there are servant women, there are family members, and there is more light that could be shed onto the dynamics of politics, family strategies, and individual choices. So one thing, some years ago, I wrote a book about a popularized book about princesses in the Nordic, in the north, and there I was surprised to see how little attention had been paid even to material that was there quite easily available, information about princesses and queens and other members of the royal court as mediators, benefactors, friends in need. There have been some books and already the Oxford project and some other projects have been shedding light to certain aspects, for example, to the connections of the Vasa princesses in the Western Europe. Still, there would be many more interesting aspects to be studied. And I have paid attention to, for example, the petitions that women of the royal family would mediate to the king, whether it was their father or brother, and also their activities in economics, politics, and family matters, how they would, in correspondence, give advice to each other about where to sell the grain or when to come to meet the other family members in a political meeting, and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to the very question of the court, who is a member of a court and where is the court active, I think attention should be paid to the fact that there were many princesses, there were queen dowagers who had groups and proteges of their own. So to shortly, now there should be a list of daughters of Gustav Vasa, as there were these princesses who got married and who kept writing to each other, kept connection with each other, and who gathered other women around them, young women, to support and to teach, and elderly women who would keep them company. And sometimes they would meet together, sometimes for a longer while they would be apart in different areas of the Swedish realm, or living in another country totally, but still they kept contact with each other. So that, for example, when Elizabeth, Princess of Elizabeth Vasa, daughter of Gustav, died, her stepmother, Queen Dowager Katharina of Stenbock family, wrote in her letter that she has lost a very good friend and a very dutiful daughter. And these princesses and their networks are currently studied by my doctoral student Terhi Katajamäki. So I will not go more into detail here, but I would very much like to see her participate to these to maybe some future meetings. Then for the whole of the late 16th century in Sweden, there was one Queen Dowager, Katarina, of the Stenbock family, who had the group and party of her own. She died. She was very young when she was married to Gustav Vasa, and she remained single after Gustav Vasa died, and her presence is visible in many occasions. There is just one example when it comes to the Fleming family hosting weddings. She was all the time hosting weddings, organizing marriages, as we will see shortly, and she is mentioned in correspondence, in diaries, in memoirs, as an important connection who greeted her family members and those who were in her networks with lavish presents, and tried to help the family members close to her as well as she could. And then surely we have John the Third and his family, and now I think well, I hope the slides are somehow changed in accordance with my yes. So and here when we come to the late 16th century, we have quite a lot of actors in play. There is the offspring of Gustav I. There is still his Queen Dowager. Then there are the consecutive queens of John III, and then the children of John III. Here we have Anna Vasa in the middle of the slide, and there are quite a lot of conflicting issues if we think of the problems related to the who would end up as the winner in the Game of Thrones in the Swedish realm, and then also there were power struggles going on in the German speaking smaller realms in the in the Western Europe, and then there was this whole issue with Lithuania, Poland, and the Baltic area, and well, as I mentioned already, I have been trying to collect and figure out what kind of correspondence there is available from the women of the court and their connections, and currently it's a little bit difficult to find time to do more research on this topic, but I hope to be able to return on it. And well, there are these political aspects, and everything in essence was political in the royal courts. But I would also like to point out some other issues. For example, in the late 16th century, there seemed to be some conflicts of interests, or some conflicts when it comes to the question of who had the last say in different processes. And for example, I give you the case of the marriage of Elsa Brahe. She was a noble woman in the court of Princess Anna, daughter of John III. And Elsa had been betrothed via Queen Dowager Katharina. However, she was unhappy with the suitor or the fiancé, and there is an interesting correspondence where Princess Anna Vasa is asking Elsa about how she feels about the marriage, and clearly she was deeply worried about that Elsa was going to be unhappy with the settled marriage. And then in 1595, Anna organized a kind of a scandalous Wednesday wedding with the man who Elsa truly wanted to marry. She organized a church sermon where all of a sudden, without further previous notice, Elsa was married to the man of her choice, Johan Gyllenstierna. And it was a huge political scandal. There were again a lot of correspondence related to this event, which I have touched upon in one article of mine. And then there was, in several occasions, it was referred to the fact that the Queen Dowager had accepted the wedding, and now the Princess Anna was acting against what had been settled, the elder royal person. So these from these examples, one gets a feeling that there is a lot of going on political level, also on personal level, on the level of family strategies, possibly also between generations who have had different opinions on how things should be settled. And these kind of aspects, how things were decided on everyday level, what kind of messages were sent, who belonged to the trusted circles. These are the things that I am mostly interested in, and I think it's there would be so many other things to say, but I'm so sorry for all the practical problems and issues and stuff. However, now you should see a list of some articles related to this topic. There is more in Swedish, more in Finnish, and some more in English as well, but these at least are related to what I have been talking to you, and I'm very happy to answer to your questions, and I thank you for your patience related to technical and practical problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And once again, we have a few minutes for a short discussion. So before anyone else, Eva, please.
I've got all these persons you mentioned described in this book by Herman Lindqvist, if I pronounce correct. And I find Klaus Fleming as a man of unique dignity. It's a very interesting person.
Yes, thank you. Yes, he was a person, a very interesting person as well, and he has been discussed quite a lot in research. However, often the research have focused on more on what was going on in the present area of present-day Finland or present-day Sweden, and I have been wondering, for example, that his son John Johan Fleming appears to have been in the court of Sigismund in Poland, but I have not been able to study the material that would possibly in Poland that might shed light on this. But Klaus Fleming was a rough guy who did not get much education, but his son seems to have been able to communicate in Italian, in Latin, and German. So he must have been studying, and he must have been in contact with people of higher educational level than his father. So that is now when we came to this topic, that is also something that would be of interest.
Thank you, Anu.
Thank you.
Anu, do you think? Sorry. Yeah. So thank you very much. Related to that previous issue about Fleming family, do you think that the education of son was because of the father or of his mother?
Well, that is a very interesting question. I'm actually currently writing a biography of,
I know. Looking forward.
Yes. I'm currently writing a biography of Klaus Fleming's spouse, Ebba, of Stenbock family, and she was better educated than her husband, but not that much. But somewhere they had, at least as a couple and as parents, they definitely had the idea that the son should be very well educated so that he could get into the best networks in the court. Yeah. But how it happened during those times, it's so unpleasant when they didn't take these degrees, so that it would say that okay, he went to the university and got this degree, but it's something that is going somewhere.
Yeah. Are there any possibilities to trace that through the books? Are there any preserved books possessed by the family?
Well, alas, as they lost, they were on the wrong side from the point of view of Duke Charles the Ninth, the family papers were confiscated and taken to Gripsholm, and apparently they were burnt in the Great Fire in Stockholm in late 17th century. So there is quite little left, but there is still more than meets the eye. So
basic research to be done.
Yes. And I have to say, when I wrote an article about the when I wrote an article about the marriage processes in the light of correspondence, I found these published letters from Anna Vaasa that are preserved in Poland, in archives of Poland. That made me think that there must be a lot of more material that I someday should take a look at in Polish archives.
Yeah, but no books, as far as you know.
No books.
Okay.
But connections to clergy. Now, when you mention about that, connections to clergy can be traced.
Interesting. Thank you, Anna.
And Anna Vaasa will be a heroine of Professor Hemperek's talk after the break, so maybe that topic will come back today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add some question? If not, let's go. Let's proceed to the next speaker, and we are happy to have Professor Raimonda Ragauskienė from Lithuanian Institute of History in Vilnius with us today. Professor Ragauskienė devoted many of her previous studies to the history of Radziwiłł family, but today she's going to discuss some aspects of the Lithuanian-Swedish historical relations until the beginning of the 17th century. Please, Professor Ragauskienė, you can start. You need to turn your microphone on. Still some problems. With a little bit of patience, we can overcome all technical problems, I'm sure. I think someone is helping. If it requires more work, I will now ask Joanna. Joanna, would you be ready to take the floor right now and present your paper while we are waiting for Professor Ragauskienė to probably start her computer and try to join us a little later?
Absolutely. If it's the best solution, then I'm in.
I'm afraid it is. I'm asking our organizer, Eva, is it possible? You think it's a good solution if Joanna starts presenting her? Okay, now Professor Ragauskienė is joining. Maybe
perfect.
Maybe she can speak. We still cannot hear you. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm very, very sorry for these problems, but maybe everything will be okay. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank dear Eva for an invitation to take part in this conference. And let me introduce a little bit myself in some words. So, I am Raimonda Ragauskienė from the Institute of Lithuanian History. And my research interests are the social and political history of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Lithuanian metrica as well, research and publication, and especially the history of the noble Radziwiłł family, Biržai and Dubingiai branch. And I can say that the newest my monograph devoted to the biological history of the Radziwiłł family, translated from Lithuanian into Polish language, will be published soon. I am interested in relations between Lithuania and Sweden/Finland in the early modern times as well. On this topic, I have published some articles. For example, one devoted to the marriage of Catherine Jagiellon and John Vasa in Vilnius in 1562, and the other about, for example, the life of Prince Gustav Eriksson Vasa, who lived and studied in Vilnius, in Academy of Vilnius, and it is interesting to emphasize that he, in the one of Vilnius tavern, pledged his father's diary even. And in this place, I can say that we paid a lot of attention to the dynastic marriage of Catherine Jagiellon and John Vasa in Lithuania in our historiography. We had international conference. We published a book devoted to this event. And in this place, I would like to notice, adding to the first presentation of our conference, very interesting presentation of Nina Maninen, that in Lithuania we not only published but and translated this inventory of dowry of Catherine Jagiellon from Polish to Lithuanian language, and it's this inventory even was analyzed by our art historian Rūta Janonienė. And this publication you can reach online. It is published in our journal, historian journal, Lietuvos pilis, Lithuanian castles, in 2010, I think so. So, the dynastic marriage of Catherine Jagiellon and John Vasa in 1562 was a rather significant event, as much in the history of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as in Sweden's and Finland's history. As a result of this marriage, a new coalition of states was formed after 1568. Sweden, Denmark, Poland, Lithuania, that was directed against Moscow. There was also another cultural side to the event. Even back when negotiations first commenced, cultural cooperation between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Sweden, Finland, and Poland began, and the first serious mutual contact between the aristocracy of these states were established. People from those countries were also interested in religious situation, first of all in the process of Reformation. So today I would like to talk about the topic, and which is connected with the newest my scientific project, which is realized under support from the Research Council of Lithuania, about the earliest Protestant preachers, or the first generations of evangelical pastors, ministers, as they were called in Lithuania, as a social and professional group during the reign of Sigismundus Augustus. Lithuania and Sweden were affected by the Reformation quite early. The King of Sweden, Gustav Vasa, from the 3rd decade, supported the Reformation in his country. The Reformation in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania began in the 4th decade, but without the support of the rulers. The Reformation took place as a process, but in different ways in both countries. How the religious situation changed was of interest in both countries. For example, the voivode of Vilnius, Mykolai Radziwiłł the Black, was informed about the religion situation in Sweden by one of his clients, who was maybe the first Lithuanian envoy to Sweden, the Protestant Hieronym Machovecky. We know about religious contacts in the beginning of the 17th century. For example, the famous Vilnius Lutheran pastor Samuel Dambrovsky in 1621 dedicated a popular postil published in Torun, Postila Chrześcijańska, to Anna Vasa. People from Sweden or Finland who visited the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the 16th century due the dynastic marriage or for other reasons had the opportunity to get to know the evangelical environment, to meet and to discuss, among others, with the earliest Protestant preachers. Religion and reform ideas also spread through word of mouth, firstly through preachers. So it's very important to know more about the first generation of evangelical pastors, ministers in Lithuania, and it is important maybe for comparing situations in Lithuania or in Sweden. So I will try to present this question, to present pastors as a social and professional group during the reign of Sigismundus Augustus, to analyze some aspects of their social collective biography, social and regional origin, professional activity before they became Protestant ministers, their education, marital status will be analyzed. A chronicle period of this research covers 2 decades, starting from Mykolai the Black Radziwiłł's official conversion in 1553 to the end of the formation processes of the evangelical confessions in Lithuania, the beginning of the 8th decade. Paradoxically, but in the broad historiography devoted to the Reformation, the evangelical clergy of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, as a professional and social group, did not receive a comprehensive study. We do not have a biographical dictionary of evangelical clergy yet. Most often, the first preachers are mentioned in researches only episodically. An addition to the list of Protestant clergy is also needed. The biographies of only a dozen ministers have been published, and those pastors who became the radical reformers, Unitarians, received the most attention. And one of the biggest problems connected with the topic is the lack of historical sources. knowledge about Protestants during the Reformation of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was in general very poor, unsystematic, and most importantly, however, all the archive of the Synod of the Evangelical Reformed Church burned during the religious tumult in 1611. The emergence of evangelical pastors in the countries that were affected by the movement of Reformation brought big challenges. Instead of a Catholic priest distinguished by his sacerdotal status and viewed as a point of contact between the sacred and the profane, the Protestant pastor emerged, no longer a participant of the divine essence, but rather of faith and forgiveness. The necessity to define the functions of a new clergy appeared. The social and confessional discrepancies within the new group appeared in different countries. Already in the 19th century, historians have noticed that the initial stage of the Reformation in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was very complicated. Firstly, in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania arose the problem of confessional dependencies of evangelical clergy. Reformation here, during the earliest period, was not theologically homogeneous, but rather liberal from the confessional point of view. The Reformation in Lithuania did not receive the support of the rulers and did not establish itself as a state's confessional system. The movement was led by private individuals, from nobles to very rich citizens, and all their experiences with Reformation ideas were very different. Because of that, the search for the doctrine of the evangelical faith lasted until even the 8th decade. And only starting from this period, from the 8th decade, there has been a clearer distinction between the evangelical reformed clergy. Therefore, in this my presentation, the list of earliest evangelical priests was drawn up from people who acted in 1553 to 1572 and who were named as evangelical preachers, minister, pastor, minister verbi divini, or minister verbum Dei by contemporaries. The list includes all evangelical pastors who participated in the creation of the evangelical church in Lithuania, named Unitas Lithuania, and even those who later, from the beginning of the 7th decade, chose the path of radical reformers, became Unitarians. And here you can see the painting of January Suchodolski, artist from the 19th century, who painted how Bishop Pavel Holshansky refuses Sigismundus Augustus to go to a Protestant church in Vilnius. Some words about this group's size. The data of 35 ministers who acted in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania are available in total. It is not possible to determine the accurate number of clergy. During 1556-1558, in the first synods, the organizational structure of the Evangelical Church of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was created. And its first leader, the superintendent, was appointed at that time, Radzivill's court minister Simon Zacius from Proshovice, who lived around 1507 to 1591, became the first superintendent, and Mykolai Vendrogovsky his deputy. With the expansion of the community in around 1560, the districts were divided in two, Vilnius and Podlachia. There were already about even 80 evangelical churches in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the 6th and 7th decades. 59 were in Vilnius and 21 in Samogitian districts. But at the same time, soon after the creation of Lithuanian Unitas, a split of the Lithuanian Evangelical Church took place between 1563 to 1565, and a number of ministers became Unitarians. The geographical origin of ministers. We know about 27 preachers, more or less clear is known this about their geographical origin. Most of them came from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. As many as 9 were from Podlachia, and the unclear case only of origin of Simon Budnas from Mazuria, Poland, or from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Podlachia region of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was more Polonized in juridical, economic, and cultural terms than the rest of Lithuania, and only 9 evangelicals came from Poland, including 3 from places near the territory of Lithuania. For example, Krovitsky, Discordia from Mazuria, Sudrovius from Mazovia, Ostrolenko, and so on. And it is a case only of one minister who came from Moscow, Minister Thomas. Therefore, the idea expressed in historiography that most of the early ministers came from Poland is not correct. The social origin. For only of the 11 preachers is known. 5 were from petty nobility, 4 from townspeople, and from craftsmen families mostly, and probably 2 were from peasants. The fact that there were nobles, Šlechta, among the clergy was a feature of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It is true, however, that those were just petty nobles. Most ministers in Poland were of plebeian origin, not just in the first stages of the Reformation, but in the latter generations too. In German lands, for example, the origin of clergy from among the educated middle classes in the towns and cities remained dominant. The education of ministers will later become one of the essential criteria for the ministers as a professional group. Only in the last quarter of the 16th century, the basic evangelical education system in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was formed. We know only about 8 ministers from the first generations of Lithuanian clergy. All of them were well educated, studied at universities, at the Krakow Academy, Leipzig, Padua, Wittenberg, or University of Königsberg. Like in the other countries where the Reformation spread, the first generations of Lithuanian Protestant clergy had a resilient connection with the medieval Catholic priesthood and indeed ministers came from all levels of the hierarchy. So we have 7 ministers who were who were ex-Catholic priests. 2 others were preparing to become Catholic priests or worked at the court of Vilnius bishop, and 2 were even ex-monks. In Lithuania, as well as in other regions, the turn to Protestantism brought the establishment of a completely new model of familial relations in a new group of clergy. Protestant clerical marriage became legitimate. According to Radziwill's Black, legal, honorable, and holy ministers' marriages are far beyond your Catholic fornication. It is known that 8 evangelical pastors from the first generations were married. It seems that one of them, Stanislav Sudrovius, was married even twice. Almost all of them, of married clergy, had children. So, after summarizing, after analyzing the data, such collective portrait of the first evangelical pastors, ministers group turned out. Most of them were from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, especially from Podlasia. Their social background was mostly low. Most of the clergy were from petty nobility or from townspeople. Peasant origin also occurred. A large number of them were ex-Catholic priests, really ex-monks. The evangelical ministers of 2 first generations were quite educated, studied at universities, firstly Krakow Academy, Königsberg, then continued their studies Leipzig, Padua, or Wittenberg, and pastors' marriages were a relatively common phenomenon. Some of them had children. So that's all, and thank you for your attention.
We don't hear you.
Do you hear me?
No, it was me. I'm very sorry. Very sorry. Thank you, Professor Ragavskina, for your interesting presentation. And we still have several minutes to ask questions.
I became that you didn't hear me at all.
It
So
was my fault. Sorry. I forgot my microphone was off. Eva, please.
Okay. This is not a question to you, but a kind of observation rather, because I noticed that all the names of Protestant clergy as minister, for example, appears also in also in Polish books, in Poland, but this word has really extremely negative connotation, especially in works by Wujek or Skarga, where ministers are very often called as devil's ministers or even the son of Satan, which proves that Protestant clergy was perceived as a kind of enemies for the church.
Yes, of course. Of course. The situation was very difficult, of course.
And this dictionary was a part of religious polemic in this time.
Yes.
If I may,
Thank
did you find any examples of foreign Protestant priests acting in Lithuania at this time, which you are interested in? I mean, like German ministers.
Thank you for your question. No, among the first generation, I don't find any foreigners, but we have a lot of foreigners from the 17th century, from Germany, from Holland, even. So we have, but only in the 17th century.
Okay, thank you. Professor Hemperek. Microphone, Darek, microphone. Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes, just a small addition. Yeah, there were many Protestant priests in Vilnius and in Grand Duchy of Lithuania coming from Königsberg. But in 17th century,
Yes,
just
yes,
addition to what Professor Ragłowskaite said. So generally, they came from Königsberg. It was there was a big theological faculty there, and they came especially to Vilnius, to Lutheran Church in Vilnius.
Rafael Kulvensis.
Yes,
Yeah.
Abraham Kulvich.
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting that they didn't show up earlier, because Königsberg University starts in the 50s, earlier, as I recall. And
yes, but first they have, as Professor Małek wrote many times, but first dukes of ducal Prussia had to move these young priests to ducal Prussia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there was a lack of pastors there. So after this, after some decades, they started to export this priests to Lithuania.
Yes, Professor Małek. No.
It's only
Okay. Thank you very much. Did anyone want to ask more questions? If not, we have the last speaker before the coffee break, and it is Joanna Zatorska-Rosen from the University of Stockholm. Joanna's PhD project focuses on Władysław Konstanty Wituski's private library, which as a war booty was brought to Sweden, mostly to Skokloster Castle. And Joanna's presentation today will give us the idea of her main research assumptions, goals, and perhaps preliminary conclusions. Joanna, the floor is yours. We need you to turn the microphone on.
Yes, thank you. My question was if you could see my presentation, because apparently
a moment ago, but not now.
Okay, but then it should. Does it work now?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Yes. So, in the first draft of the program of our symposium, you could read that I would talk about the picture of wars emerging from Wituski's book collection, but I believe that what is probably much more interesting for you to hear today is more general information about my research project as a whole. So today I will actually shortly present my source materials, my study aims, and some of my theoretical and methodological inspirations. And the working title of my dissertation is Władysław Konstanty Wituski's book collection at Skokloster Castle. And the first thing to explain is what is Skokloster Castle, the place where the book collection is preserved. Well, Skokloster Castle is a marvelous Baroque residence in Sweden, built between 1654 and 1676. And nowadays it's a museum, and it's located about 70 kilometers northwest from Stockholm. And the castle's founder was Carl Gustaf Wrangel, and his library belonged to Sweden's finest early modern book collections. In 1676, the year of Wrangel's death, it contained about 2,400 books. As you can expect, the books covered a vast variety of topics and were written in Latin and several vernaculars of Europe, like German, French, Italian, and Spanish. However, not all of the books Wrangel left for the posterity were written in the languages he comprehended. Over 100 texts were written in Polish. They were taken in the mid-17th century from various libraries of Polish noblemen, together with plenty of books written in other languages. And one of the names frequently appearing among provenance notes on books brought from Poland is the name of Władysław Konstanty Wituski. And I will soon tell you a bit more about Wituski, but first I would like to mention that Carl Gustaf Wrangel looted not only private libraries of Polish noblemen, but also their archives. And for over 2 centuries, the manuscripts taken by the general from various country houses had been kept at Skokloster Castle. Only in 1892 were they moved to the Swedish National Archives, Riksarkivet, where they are nowadays known as the Skokloster Collection. And among them, scattered in various files, there are documents concerning Władysław Konstanty Wituski. The vast majority of those manuscripts were written by Wituski himself. However, apart from letters, school notebooks, orations, and a handwritten list of soldiers, which all carry Władysław Konstanty Wituski's signature, the Skokloster collection contains also letters he was the recipient of. And now a couple of words about Wituski himself. In spite of the fact that Władysław Konstanty Wituski, born 1603, died around 1655, nowadays seems to have slid into partial oblivion, he was far from being an average Polish nobleman. Having conducted an educational peregrination through Europe, Wituski, led by curiosity and a striving for military excellence, went all the way to Brazil, where, despite his Catholic background, he fought on the Dutch side against the Portuguese and the Spaniards. Back in Poland, Wituski held several public offices and was elected to the Sejm, which is legislature of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a few times. On his deathbed, Wituski could not have known that the library he had assembled was soon to end up among Carl Gustaf Wrangel's books as a war booty at Skokloster Castle in Sweden. And now let me tell you about some sources of inspiration for what I aim to do with all those source materials, which is books and handwritten documents connected to Wituski. Well, Arne Lossman, former director of Skokloster Castle, perceived a private library as an intellectual landscape of its owner. For him, the extraordinary significance of historical book collections lies in the fact that they both reflect the given epoch's reality and provide data on patterns of thought and values contemporary with the book collectors. And here comes a quotation from Swedish in my translation. The book collectors belonged to a social, political, economic, and cultural elite with big influence on their times. The ideas and the concept of mankind of those in power can be understood owing to their libraries, we can wander in their intellectual landscape. Libraries of the nobility are not collections of dusty tomes. They reflect a contemporary, very tangible reality. Another source of my scholarly inspiration is a British researcher, T.A. Birrell, who wrote once that, quotation, "A private library is part of its owner's biography. The known facts of his life may help in understanding his choice of books, but the converse may also be true. His choice of books may add to the understanding of the known facts of his life." End of the quotation. So my starting point is the assumption that the private library has a cultural and anthropological dimension or meaning. And here I should mention that Władysław Konstanty Wituski's book collection at Skokloster Castle Library has never been catalogued as a whole. This study is thus the first attempt to provide a possibly complete bibliography of Wituski's books and to discuss his library preserved at Skokloster Castle in detail. And through a careful and systematic study of Wituski's library, I aim to uncover his literary taste and preferences, values, interests, as well as intellectual and social aspirations. And adopting a microhistorical approach, I believe that by looking at the library of Wituski, not an aristocrat, but a well-to-do nobleman, we are offered an insight into the culture condition, culture potentiality of the nobility in the so-called Silver Age of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that was so abruptly hampered by the historical events of the mid-17th century. And when it comes to my methods, in the first part of my dissertation, I do what microhistorians usually do, which is basically scraping any available piece of information of all possible source materials. A careful investigation of the manuscripts preserved in the Swedish National Archives allows me to reconstruct the consecutive stages of education Władysław Konstanty Wituski received in Poland and abroad, as well as his social contact network, which stimulated him both intellectually and culturally. Moreover, his letters provide a profound insight into the world of his emotions, interests, experiences, aspirations, values, and concerns. And then in the second part of my dissertation, I reconstruct and analyze Wituski's book collection. And here I use a couple of methods. Partially, it's methods typical of book history. So the first step is obviously to determine the exact number of Wituski's books preserved at Skokloster Castle. And then a second step, for an investigation of the books as physical objects, I aim to reveal the presence of any signs of their usage, such as annotations, marginal marks, underlined passages, or quite the opposite, uncut sheets of paper. I shall also investigate the bindings, look at the quality of editions, at the printing houses the books came from, because that also tells me if he was more of a book collector or a pragmatic book user. And then yet another step of my investigation may be called a semiotic strategy, as I will investigate content of the books and then create groups and subgroups of books linked by common subjects like political literature or religious literature, within which there are subgroups of hagiographic literature and so-called shrine literature, which is prints on miracle working images or mystical writings, and so on and so on. And by tracing collective patterns in his library, I intend to draw conclusions on, as I mentioned, his intellectual horizons, literary taste, values, social aspirations, and so on. And then the very last thing is to look for possible connections between his life and his book collection. And here I can already give you a couple of examples. For instance, Witkowski participated in the Sejm of 1639. And a major political scandal caused by the imprisonment of King Władysław IV's brother, John Casimir, accused of espionage by Cardinal Richelieu, was discussed during that gathering. And what we can find in Witkowski's collection is a book on this very subject, the imprisonment of John Casimir. Another example is a dedication in one of the books that reveals that Witkowski was sent on a diplomatic mission, which is a piece of information which is completely absent in other source materials I've investigated. And then what I can also already tell you about the collection itself. Well, there are approximately 80 titles in the collection. And Władysław Konstanty Witkowski collected rather contemporary books, and he did so throughout his life. However, some volumes had been issued before he was born. The oldest book in his library was published 1580, and the newest approximately 3 years before his death in 1652. And in several cases, books bear provenance notes of the previous owners, which indicates that Witkowski either acquired some of his volumes on the second-hand market or received them as gifts. One book is marked with Ioannis Witkowski Derzycko inscription, which proves that Władysław Konstanty inherited it after his father. The majority of the printed texts were published within the territories of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, including Ducal Prussia, which was a vassal state of Poland at that time, namely in Krakow, Warsaw, Gdańsk, Jarosław, Królewiec, Lubcz, Poznań, Toruń, Vilnius, Zamość, and Żyrowice. And some titles are of unknown origin, but judging by the content referring to primary national or local matters, they were presumably also issued within the borders of the Commonwealth. Thus, it might be assumed that about 84% of the books come from national printing houses, and the foreign books were published in Antwerp, Paris, Geneva, Leiden, Louvain, Toulouse, and Venice. And when it comes to the languages, the number of books written in Latin and Polish is almost equal. And then there is a couple of French and Italian books. The books vary considerably in length. The shortest booklets consist of as few as 8 pages, while the most extensive volumes cover around 1,500 pages. And what is characteristic of Witkowski's book collection, of Witkowski's books, are quite simple bindings. Many brochures lack any binding at all, and only a few volumes have a bit more elaborate bindings. And this is actually the very last thing I would like to show you. I would like to show you some of the books and the bindings. So here comes the first group of books, which I call simple bindings. And then a bit more elaborate bindings, which are quite few in the collection. Oh yes, and there is a funny anecdote connected to this one. because I was at the castle and I ordered Baudin's De Republica, and I got this copy, and I thought like, oh wow, this is a nice one, really, really a very pleasant to the eye. But I opened the book and I couldn't find Wituski's surname, so I thought like, there's something wrong. Perhaps there was a mistake in the catalog or something. So I asked the librarian, and it turned out that she had made a mistake and brought me a wrong copy, not Wituski's copy, because Wituski's copy of the same book looks actually like this, the one to the right on the presentation. So not really the same aesthetical effect. Yes, and then there is the last group, unfortunately the biggest, of books which lack any binding at all. Yes, and then if I may come back to you so I see your faces. Yes, perfect. I just wanted to say that bindings, it's a whole new universe for me. So if if you looked at any of the bindings and thought it obviously tells us this and that, then I would be extremely grateful if you could share your comment with me. Well, otherwise, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you too, Joanna. It was very interesting, and please feel free to offer some questions and pieces of advice to Joanna she requested for. I know we have delay. Sorry, Eva. We are not very disciplined, but we still should use the occasion to have a little discussion. Yes, Professor Peter Sjöqvist.
Yes, I wonder about the identification of the prince in Wituski's collections. Can you find his name on all the items that you have identified? Or is there another way how you could identify the books that he owned?
There is one tricky thing to it, which is blocks.
Yeah.
Prints bound together,
Yeah.
and we have 2 such cases in his collection. And in both cases, his surname appears only on the first print of the blocks. But I will obviously state it very openly in my dissertation. But I did the assumption that the whole block belonged to him.
Yeah.
But otherwise, apart from those 2 blocks, all the books carry his surname. So, well, obviously, even at Skokloster, there could be possibly more books which he owned, but as we lack an inventory and a list of his books, it's impossible to prove.
Yeah. I wondered as well if considering the material evidence of the books, I mean, are there a lot of annotations and
reading
traces
signs?
From it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It varies a lot because some copies seem to be completely untouched. There is even one book which has uncut sheets of paper. But there is a couple of books with pretty rich annotations. The first pages of the books were used as sort of notebooks. So, for instance, in the book I showed, this Gostomski's book, there is pretty rich note on things related to how to call it. Well, keeping now I have a Swedish herrgård. Well,
a manor house.
Yeah, exactly, and things connected to
agriculture.
Exactly. And these notes are in Polish. There are also some Latin notes. So yeah, there is some interesting material.
Yeah, and what I wondered too, I have one final question, is because you said that some of the books had previous owners as well.
Mm-hmm.
And can you be sure in those cases that you can separate between Vituski's annotations and the previous owners? I mean, if he has a very typical handwriting, handwriting style, that could be possible, of course.
Well, I do have access to his letters,
Yeah.
so I am somehow familiar with his with the style of his letters. However, it also changed over the years. That's a challenge. Like reading his letters from the early period is not much of a problem, but as he aged, it really gets tricky.
Yeah.
But well, I have some chances to at least to try to compare. But then there is also the thing that even if I can't prove it was written by him, it's still interesting in the book historical context because those books are in this way unique and they carry certain information, and I guess I can at least suspect that he at least glanced at those handwritten notes as well.
Yeah. Well, I suddenly thought that I have one more question. Do I have time for that?
Of course.
Yes. Oh, lovely. Yeah, and that is, do you know how he acquired his books? And are there signs in the books of that have been made by, for example, book dealers or at book auctions or things like that?
No, I haven't noticed anything like that.
Okay.
But you can see that in some periods there are more books coming from certain periods than the other. So, for instance, it seems that when he was studying in Krakow, he acquired books, and then when he was traveling through Europe, there is sort of a gap in his book acquisitions. It's of course tricky, like the date of when the book was printed. It's not a full information, right? Because he could have acquired them secondhand, and I guess that's the case. For instance, there is one book about Brazil. That's actually the earliest book in his collection. This 1580, and he probably acquired it right before going to Brazil because he was curious about the country he was going to. But like this is not any strong evidence. He could have acquired it afterwards as well as a I don't know, nice memory from the journey. What did you say? Sorry.
It's logical.
Yeah. Like
it's highly likely.
It's likely.
Professor Hemperek.
Just a small glossa to your excellent speech. As we know, very much was done by Professor Teodorowicz Hellman 12, 13 years ago. During your speech, I have found some books, you see, from Skokloster, and perhaps this also is known.
Absolutely.
Yes. And also some Polish researchers have done some books like this from Skokloster. It's called chocolate books of Professor chocolate books of Professor Nowicka-Jeżowa from Warsaw, who was also engaged in this program, in this grant. So I'm very happy to hear your presentation, to hear your speech, because it looks that it is very interesting methodology of research of this library of Wituski. It's very modern and exciting, really. So congratulations.
Thank you. I'll try to do my best because the materials are really excellent and fascinating.
Thank you, Joanna. It was very, very interesting for all of us. And now we conclude our first session. Thanks to all our excellent speakers, and thanks for all the inspiring questions and remarks. We are going to meet again after a short coffee break, but at this point, I think I would like to give the floor over to Eva, to Dr. Cybulska-Bohuszewicz, who's going to tell us more about the timing schedule, which obviously must be changed now.
Okay, I think that now it will be a coffee break, and we will see again about 15 minutes, I think.
1:45.
Yes. Okay, it's a quite short time.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's enough. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mirosława, for conducting this session. Thank you for your help and for all of your speeches. It was really excellent, very informative. Thank you, and see you for a while.
See you.
Thank you. See you soon.